Hello, hello, beautiful fellow humans. So today I am feeling a strong urge to come on and share with you about the Milgram Experiment. I feel that it is incredibly applicable and instructive for what we are currently traversing as a society now and over the last 2 years. It has some really, really important lessons for us, and it's a really good cautionary tale. So let me jump into this experiment. I'm going to try to explain it as quickly as possible here. So this experiment, it's big in the social psychology world. One of my degrees is in psychology, and I remember throughout getting my degree in both lower and upper level classes, we discussed this experiment multiple times because of its implications, because of how shocking the implications can be regarding authority and obedience. Specifically authority and obedience. So let me explain to you how this experiment was set up. We have participants, right? The participants who did not know the behind the scenes of what was going on in this experiment, who were instructed to sit in a chair, and they had like this electrical machine in front of them, and they were told that they would be asked to administer electric shocks to another participant who was on the other side of a curtain if they got wrong answers to some test questions. And this person who's on the other side of the curtain, who is supposedly receiving the electric shocks, was an affiliate with this research experiment. They weren't actually participants and weren't actually being shocked. And so what they found is, there was also a guy in a white coat who would be standing there beside the actual participants, encouraging them to administer these electric shocks when somebody got an answer incorrectly. And these shocks would begin as very, very small. And then as the person would get more and more answers incorrect, as they were encouraged to do, to answer disproportionate number of questions than would someone normally would incorrectly, they were instructed, the real participants were instructed to up the intensity of these electric shocks. They would begin to show distress, some of them, like they didn't really want to, but then the guy in the white coat would say, yes, keep doing it. This is part of the experiment. Don't worry, it's all okay. Keep doing it. And what they found was 65% of the participants were willing to turn the voltage all the way up to the highest level, 450 volts, and continue administering these shocks for wrong answers, even when the person on the other side of the curtain, again, they were acting, was screaming out in pain and begging them to stop. They would continue administering these high voltage electric shocks, 65%. And that's just the percentage of people who are willing to go up to the highest level of intensity of these electric shocks. So what can we infer here? Us human beings have some serious shadow wounding disconnect around following authority. So with what's going on right now, right? We have people in positions of authority who are telling us that certain people who aren't falling in line with certain directives, there's just certain consequences to that. And they deserve to have these consequences brought upon them for not complying or following in line. And then what we have is a lot of people who are parroting this, directive that is being handed down from governments, authority figures, bureaucrats, technocrats, rather than actually listening to these people. Now we have millions of people across the world, and it's only going to continue to grow, right? There's many, many more. These voices have been widely censored and quieted, who are standing up and saying, this is hurting me. This is hurting my family, right? Mandates, what's happening in Canada, these mandates, lockdowns, they are hurting me and my family. I'm begging you to stop. And could there be an invitation here to actually stop and listen to them, knowing that we have a predisposition, right, to obey authority, obey white coats, the white coat syndrome? Wouldn't it be better to err on the side of caution and to really, really create as much time and space as we possibly can to hear the people who are telling us, who are raising their hands and telling us, this is hurting me and my family, please stop, as opposed to just parroting down these consequences that certain people in positions of power, currently in these positions of power, that power is eroding, are telling us are appropriate, right? In the Milgram study, they kept assuring these participants that these were appropriate consequences for receiving a wrong answer, right? It gets to be a very slippery slope when we start talking about consequences that are causing enough harm, pain, and distress in people where they're standing up and saying, this hurts, I can't take it anymore, please stop. That no longer feels like a consequence, right? It feels like punishment or abuse. And it is this very slippery slope where usually abusers will use the justification that their abuse is justified because it's an appropriate punishment or consequence, right? We know there's so much research data out there now that shows us that punishment is not an effective means to influence or modify behavior. If this was correct, we wouldn't have a prison system that is filled with, quote unquote, repeat offenders. Everybody anecdotally, right, knows that friend or that friend of a friend who had a really, really strict and overbearing, punishment-oriented household that they grew up in, who then, moves out of their house or goes off to college and just completely goes off the deep end. Punishment is not an effective means at modifying behavior. Punishment that morphs into abuse, right? When does punishment become abuse? Well, I would say that punishment becomes abuse when the person who's receiving that punishment tells you that it feels abusive, that it's hurting them, that it's causing them mental, emotional, or physical distress and is begging you to stop. The other really important thing to realize in the Milgram experiment was they did a little tweak to that, right? Where what they did is that instead of just having one person sitting there who was administering the shocks, they had a little group of people. And one of them was an implant, not an actual participant, but part of the research team, who would refuse. No, I'm not going to administer these shocks anymore. I'm done. This doesn't feel right to me. And what they found is that when one person said no, I think it was also around 60-something% of the other participants would stand up and say, I'm not going to do it either. So this also shows us that although we have this sort of predisposition or wounding around obedience when it comes to authority, that courage is also contagious. When we make the brave choice to listen to somebody who thinks, feels, or sees something in a different way than us, when we make the brave choice to speak up and stand for love, to stand for unity, when so much division and social shaming and cancel culture is being propagated, our courage is contagious. It literally takes one person speaking up before a bunch of others speak up. And because of this contagious nature of courage, it is absolutely my expectation and prediction, and just a natural eventuality, that we're going to see so many other people speaking up about how mandates, lockdowns, governmental abuses of power over the last couple years have severely harmed them. And I know that with political ideology, fear, egos, it's so easy to lump people and stereotype people and put them in a group and say that they're other or they're different from you and not be willing to listen to them. And when we do that, we're particularly susceptible, right, to parroting and taking on and passing on these consequences that our governments, that people in positions of power or authority, that we've allowed to be in positions of power or authority, are telling us are appropriate. And yeah, it's like, sheesh, if we're willing to do this in an experimental setting, what are we willing to do? Again, when things like ego, political ideology, fear, groupthink come into play. This is something for us to be really, really aware of. And when we know that there's this natural human tendency, I think to err on the side of caution by going the complete opposite way and be more willing than ever to listen to each other and hear each other, right? This is why people in the spiritual community have been talking for so long, and particularly over the last couple of years, about the importance of cultivating our discernment, of cultivating, sovereignty, cultivating heart consciousness is so important, because we need to be able to engage our hearts instead of shutting people down simply because they're in a different group that certain people in authority are telling us are bad or wrong and deserved and get what's coming to them. So I wrote down a few things that I have heard and I have noticed and I've witnessed as I've paid attention to these people who are standing up and speaking out about the harm that they feel that they have incurred. And I wrote it down. I just want to read to you a few of the things that I've seen and encourage you to do your own research and be open to hearing from people and decide what feels good to you in terms of what consequences, punishment, or abuses you think are justifiable in the face of somebody having a different position than you and wanting to have authority over their own body. So some of the things that have happened, right, over the last 2 years. Small businesses have been completely decimated by mandates with having to close permanently, while large corporations that have affiliations with certain politicians, bureaucrats, technocrats have recorded record profits, some in the multi-billion. This is easy information to find. I'll let you find it on your own. Unemployment rates going up, which always correlate to increased deaths, increased suicides, and increased homelessness. Many of us have seen this in so many areas in our communities. There are several people in the Freedom Convoy movement, several parents who have come forward talking about their children who have very tragically committed suicide due to the decline in mental health and loneliness that they experienced after school closures and the mandates and the change in environment within their schools. Nurses and healthcare workers, right, who bravely cared for our sick, who are out there on the front lines when everything was hitting the fan. But as soon as the poke was mandated, they didn't feel like they resonated with that. They weren't ready to do that. They were cast aside without a thought, right? We had 34,000 healthcare workers that were terminated in New York alone after the mandate was passed. This during a time where we're hearing about hospital worker shortages. And actually, many of these nurses, I personally went back and forth with a couple of these nurses who said that they weren't even terminated. They were put on indefinite leave, which means they can't even collect severance, unemployment. They can't get COBRA health insurance benefits. To me, this feels incredibly abusive. They're saying that it feels abusive, and I'm inclined to agree with them. Pediatric speech therapists who are reporting record numbers of children under 2 who have speech delays, which they directly attribute to masking, right? Small children need to be able to see people's faces and mouths move to help with speech development. We have many First Nations, Indigenous, Aboriginal communities who have been desperately trying to get the attention of the masses of mainstream media due to the increased hardship that the mandates have brought to their communities. Parents who haven't been able to cross borders to hold and touch and see their children. Again, I've also talked with a couple individuals specifically from Canada where this has happened. They haven't been able to cross the border. And their spouse had taken their child, over to the US, and they're not able to reconnect. We also know that opiate use, alcoholism, drug use, domestic violence have gone through the roof, right? So there are people who are having on the ground these direct experiences, these direct repercussions, who are raising their hand and saying, "This hurts. Please stop. Please help me." And I think it would benefit us, regardless of what we end up deciding that we do or don't agree with in the long run, to at least hear these people out and listen to them. So remember the wisdom from the Milgram experiments, and let's not fall into that trap, right? Courage over blind obedience. I love you all so much. Have a great day.